breaking updates. Very important.
One thing about Snow White in particular has a lot to do with Rachel Zegler's firing situation. We already talked about how she was let go from various projects by the Walt Disney Company, including doing voiceover work for Toy Story 5.
I think it's fair to say that no one can stand the star of this movie.
And how Rachel Zegler disrespected the original and a classic from Walt Disney, something that completely saved Disney and changed the company and changed animation in general.
Now, ever since the debut of Snow White, it has been nothing more than a box office disaster, not just for the Walt Disney Company and Bob Iger as the CEO, but also for Rachel Zegler.
The reason we had Rachel Zegler on the docket is she's an asshole.
Because Rachel Zegler is a PR nightmare.
So one thing about Bob Iger is that we know that he is now in complete damage control mode as well as double down mode to really just try and attempt to fix this movie as much as possible, to lie to the audience.
This is truly, like, she has to go. I'm sorry, Disney. She has to go.
One major development going on now involves more to do with the Rachel Zegler firing situation that took place in her recent behavior toward both Disney and toward the critics.
Snow White, there's been an enormous amount of controversy surrounding Snow White, obviously.
This is someone who is as entitled as, I don't need your business. You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film. You didn't write it, you didn't direct it. You have nothing to do with the creation of Snow White. Right. You should shut up and do the job.
Has there been a film with worse casting than this? And I don't just mean the Snow White actress. Obviously, she's terrible, but both of them.
So one thing about Snow White 25, as we know it, is that it is by far the worst iteration of Snow White. There is no doubt about this because of the storyline, because of the way it was created, the overall agenda. But let's be real, all agendas aside, putting the ideology over to the wayside, this is just a bad movie in isolation.
And now you better have a good reason to get people to the theaters, and this ain't it.
She's not like the ideal choice for the lead role in Sweet Snow White.
The acting, the producing, the directing, the writing, the cinematography, everything about it across the board is just lackluster. It really sounds, or should I say feels like, even looks like a fever dream. That's how bad of a movie it really is.
There's a reason why the public has shifted. If you can't avoid this movie, you absolutely should, because it's absolutely... I know some people like this movie. Some people are stupid. Oops!
Oh, man.
Hello, Disney. You're going to have to redo your film again because this woman is a pig and you fired Gina Carano for far less than this nonsense.
Welcome back to Fame Focus. They say Disney is the happiest place on earth, but Bob Iger seems to be feeling anything but sunshine and rainbows. In a move that's jolted the entertainment world, the Disney CEO allegedly fired Rachel Zegler. Yes, the Snow White 2025 star herself from all future projects.
One major development going on now involves more to do with the Rachel Zegler firing situation. She was let go from various projects by the Walt Disney Company.
Imagine a royal ball where the princess is suddenly told, "Your carriage is waiting, but it's here to whisk you off the payroll." That's the vibe swirling around the Magic Kingdom rumor mill right now. How did Disney's once cherished live-action venture turn into such a fiasco? The official story is mired in creative differences, but insiders point to much more. A tanking box office, test screenings that triggered red alert sirens, and an online backlash so fierce it would make the evil queen proud. Toss in some last-minute script rewrites, a massive budget going up in flames, and you've got yourself a recipe for one of the biggest controversies in Mouse House history.
Now, one thing about Rachel Zegler is that we know that she's not helping at all one bit.
So, buckle up. We're about to dissect the comedic chaos behind Disney's ill-fated Snow White remake, from the very moment Bob Iger said, "You're out," to the financial fallout that has everybody crying into their popcorn. Let's start with the moment that shook Tinseltown. Bob Iger, known for steering Disney through acquisitions of Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars, apparently had enough. Early box office projections for Snow White 2025 rolled in, and the numbers were so underwhelming they made the dwarf's cottage look like a mansion in comparison.
Snow White is the lowest performing Disney movie in decades. No one waited in line to see it. Are you kidding?
Early estimates suggested that they would take in 48 to 58 million in the first weekend. Apparently, it did 43 million in its first weekend. But this live-action remake is a giant fail.
Consider it. Disney's very first animated film has been remade, a fundamental component of the brand. According to rumors, the opening night felt more like a private screening than the long queues that studio executives had anticipated.
Disney is hosting a Hollywood premiere of Snow White on March 15th, but the studio won't be rolling out a robust red carpet. That's right. The premiere is just, don't tell anybody. They have to do it.
Rumor has it that Iger demanded an urgent meeting before you could say bibbidity bobby boo on the studio lot. Every angle was examined by the suits. Test viewers complained about a convoluted plot, bad pacing, and unfunny gags. The marketing team expressed their sincere regret for not being able to summon that classic Disney enchantment. Finally, scathing memes and the dreaded hashtag #NotMySnowWhite were all over social media. Iger evidently lost patience. Whether by a face-to-face conversation or an impersonal email, Rachel Zegler's contract was terminated. Just a quick farewell? No. Spin-offs. No future princess sequels, no cameos in the next major crossover.
She was let go from various projects by the Walt Disney Company, including doing voiceover work for Toy Story 5 as a character codenamed Spiral. She was also booted from the Pirates of the Caribbean remake, which I'm really starting to question whether or not that's even gonna be made by the Walt Disney Company anymore.
Behind the scenes, you guys know as well as I do that those executives like Spielberg are looking at that saying, Rachel Zegler can F right off.
It's corporate lingo for someone to be blamed, but Disney says they're taking the movie's poor performance very seriously. Regretfully, Zegler thinks that person is her. However, she wasn't the only one in this downward trajectory. Drama, financial, issues, and what many refer to as the Frankenstein effect throughout the entire production. Speaking of Frankenstein, you won't believe how many times they attempted to reassemble this film.
Given all the behind-the-scenes mayhem, I expected a Frankenstein's monster were seen to be stitched together. I think a lot of these live-action updates are really hard to watch. They've really done so much stepping on rakes over the last few months with this project where the box office is just not going to recover.
Before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe because, let's be honest, without your help, I wouldn't exist. Let's return to the focus on fame. Snow White 2025 will make sense to anyone who has ever attempted to glue a shattered vase together only to discover that crucial components are missing. Disney promoted it early on as a faithful but contemporary adaptation of the 1937 classic. Executives, however, became anxious following the initial test screenings. Wooden humor and awkward character arcs were among the criticisms. In an attempt to save the sinking ship, they thus ordered a flurry of reshoots. The second wave then struck. A third followed, with fresh pages coming straight from the printer and completely altering plot points and character motivations.
Disney has botched this Snow White movie every way it's possible to botch the Snow White movie. So you'll recall that originally the Snow White movie starring Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot, you'll remember that that film had a trailer so awful that Disney had to completely recut the movie. It showed that the dwarves were not, in fact, dwarves in Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, because that would be offensive, apparently, to little people. So instead, they just made the dwarves normal-sized humans, which was idiotic, because that's not the story. Then they decided they couldn't actually cast, little people in these roles, so they decided to cast big people and then shrink them down using CGI, so it looks terrible.
In every way that a Snow White film can go wrong, Disney has failed with this one. You may remember the original Snow White film, which starred Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot. You may recall that the trailer for that movie was so bad that Disney had to recut the entire film. In Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, it was demonstrated that the dwarves were not in fact dwarves because it would be offensive to small people, it seems. It was foolish because that isn't the story. Instead, they just made the dwarves human-sized. Subsequently, they determined that they couldn't really use small individuals for these parts. Therefore, they chose to cast large characters and then use computer-generated imagery to make them appear horrible.
Did the dwarfs make it or no?
Well, the CGI dwarfs did. Of course, that goes back to the original controversy where Peter Dinklage, a very talented little person actor, said, "Why are we doing that?"
Rewriting the essay as the professors were already gathering, it was like pulling an all-nighter for a test, according to production insiders. A few scenes were filmed more than once, each with a distinct tone. One humorous, one somber, one empowering. Women, and one that went back to Snow White's rescue. Everyone was baffled by the conclusion, including the costume designers and cinematographers. What version are we used once more? A patchwork method, of course, results in a patchwork film. Thus, test audiences experienced whiplash when the final edit was shown. Snow White was a powerful, self-assured warrior 1 minute, and then she was helpless and staring. Some of the dwarfs are stoic, some are humorous,
From
and
Daily
some
Mail.
are hardly featured in the
Snow
film.
White and the Empty Cinemas. Embarrassing photos show deserted theaters with no bookings in prime-time slots. Look at this one. So many people here to watch Snow White. To be fair, this clip right here actually was from a video where they show the screen and then show the audience is empty.
Each subplot seems to contradict the one before it. And Rachel Zegler's performance somewhere in the middle of all this mayhem. Once hailed as Disney's next big thing, it was forgotten. However, a disorganized production was only half the problem. The stark truth contrasted with marketing bluster in the other half. Disney's marketing team is said to be able to sell ice in a frozen palace. This time, however, the promotional department's wizards had to deal with a problem that no catchphrase could cover up. Disney used streaming banners, social media advertisements, and billboards to promote the world's most popular movie. Maybe forgetting that box office figures aren't just made up. The hype train was doomed as soon as fans noticed. Nearly empty theaters on the first weekend.
There is another controversy, and this one's actually kind of funny, and that is most people have been complaining that the evil witch who is jealous of Snow White's beauty is substantially more attractive than Snow White.
Aspect of disbelief you have to suspend is the idea that Gal Gadot, as the wicked witch here, as the evil stepmother, is somehow less good looking than Rachel Zegler. Come on, gang. But we're not all blind. We can still see.
In the meantime, the movie's star was in hot water for reasons other than the unfavorable reviews. Social media was having a great time. Tweets began to circulate about how much more attractive the evil queen is than Snow White.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird. So we didn't do that this time.
The goods. On store shelves, princess dolls, stuffed dwarves, and even expensive collector's edition items accumulated dust. Within the first week, retailers cut prices by half. There are still no takers, despite some even offering buy one, get one free. It was as though the universe had come to the conclusion that no amount of fairy dust could save the problem if Disney's own followers didn't accept the spin. This is where the meltdown really gets out of control. Do you recall Rachel Zegler's alleged empowering monologues, sequences in which Snow White forged her own route up a perilous precipice and rejected all forms of it?
They could not make this movie work for the life of them, and now they're trying to bury it.
Several reports claim that these scenes were highly advertised when they were being filmed. In interviews, Zegler even alluded to her eagerness to play a more aggressive Snow White. Those speeches then suddenly disappeared, edited, cropped, or reshot into oblivion when the final cut came.
But this live-action remake is a giant fail. It is not doing well at the box office. When it comes to the Rotten Tomatoes score on this thing, even the critics are not in love with Disney's Snow White. It's clocking in at 44%. The cinema score, which is basically how audiences respond to the film, is a B+, which generally is not terrible, but it actually is quite terrible with regard to kids' films. Kids' films are graded on a curve. There's never been a Disney live-action remake that is graded lower than an A-, except for Snow White.
Disney reportedly feared alienating half of its audience by getting too involved in contemporary issues. As a result, they alienated both parties. The entire revamp was too radical for traditional admirers. It was called a half-baked attempt at feminism by progressive viewers. Caught in the crossfire, Zegler vented her irritation in quiet, off-the-record conversations, but rumors claim that her annoyance was not concealed in any way. She was abruptly made the scapegoat for the problems in the movie. When the studio was searching for a way out, it was easy to blame this face. If the most optimistic figures are to be believed, the first weekend's revenue was less than $90 million. Sales of merchandise stagnated. Unloved on store shelves, plush dwarfs were so frequently marked down that not even bargain hunters were interested. Large shops who had prepared for the next Frozen phenomena ended up with excess inventory, which has become a joke in the business. Do you recall the 2025 Snow White meltdown? The boxes in the rear are still gathering dust. Disney's finance analysts are currently working feverishly to revise projections for future projects. Everything from future movie greenlights to theme. Park budgeting might be impacted. Let's face it, no one at Disney wants to witness another huge failure. Several lesser, possibly more successful films could have been made with the money squandered here. Speaking of important choices, the disaster has raised a more significant query. Who is Disney now? Some seasoned creatives are complaining inside. The House of Mouse. We used to win people over with ageless, straightforward tales. We are now catering to every fad. Snow White 2025 feels like the ultimate cautionary story, with corporate demands and brand synergy seemingly overshadowing the feeling of magic that previously distinguished Disney from hand-drawn animations to uplifting songs. Underappreciated by fans, overworked, and overhyped. Some staff members are concerned that the emphasis on spin-offs and remakes is displacing truly creative ideas. They highlight the fact that Walt Disney was once an innovator, rather than just a chronicler of the past. The disaster has turned into a red flag in this climate. Should we continue to add contemporary twists to the classics or forge a new course? If there's a bright side, this spectacular failure might finally make the studio reevaluate its strategy. The way to salvation may lie in fewer chefs in the kitchen, more cohesive narratives, and sincere appreciation for what originally made classics so enchanted. However, no one knows which way the ship will go next, with Rachel Zegler gone and Bob Iger at the helm. Hollywood is closely monitoring the situation, fearing that Snow White's demise would lead to a reevaluation of reboots and sequels across the board. Is there a happy ending here then? Not precisely. Once Disney's optimistic new princess, Rachel Zegler, departed the stage in a cloud of online animosity and corporate turmoil. Some people now believe that Bob Iger was the one who ended as stars. Big break. In the meanwhile, Snow White 2025 will be remembered as a notorious failure. Evidence that putting a classic on a poster alone won't guarantee success. It serves as a warning to the entire Mouse House as well. Perhaps it will encourage them to rekindle the passion that initially drew us to talking animals, fantastical realms, and sentimental tales. Genuine imagination, not hurried current commentary or desperate brand pandering, is what fans are most longing for. Regarding Disney's ability to recover, the Mouse has survived difficult times in the past, from canceled projects that never got off the ground to, well, theme park slumps. However, this disaster seems unique, like a real fissure in the strong walls of the kingdom. Everyone is watching to see what Bob Iger does next. Will he focus more on remakes, or will he wait and consider new stories? Will fresh talent emerge to re-establish the magic and trust that characterized Disney in the past? Time will tell. Memes, cheap goods, and a celebrity who probably won't be walking through Disneyland with a free fast pass anytime soon are all we have for the time being. Perhaps this twisted fairy tale's lesson is that even the largest kingdoms need to exercise caution when revising a beloved tale. If you don't, you run the risk of making a dream that your heart desires into a nightmare that your followers will never forget. I'd love to know what you think before you leave. After the Snow White fiasco, do you believe Disney can still turn things around, or is the magic mirror finally irreparably broken? Please remember to like and subscribe, as it really aids us. And feel free to share your thoughts and hot takes in the comments section. I appreciate you watching. Keep informed, keep safe, and stay tuned till the next time. Only on the Fame Frame.